It's another one of our Christians in Media podcast here with Faith in Media. Carla, your host here. And I'm so honored to be sharing our platform today with Sarah Holloway. Sarah, welcome to Faith in Media. How are you today?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I'm doing well. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I love that you are someone that I feel, if I may say, wears a lot of different hats or has worn many different hats. And I think that's probably the mildest way to describe it. But tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do. And we are a media podcast, and we know that this is something that you sit in quite comfortably. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, yes, it's certainly a journey that I didn't expect all those years ago. And I think lots of people have said, whenever I meet them, I go, what are you doing now? And they put me in a box and say, this is, I thought you were X, Y, Z. So a bit of background. So I was a professional dancer. And then I worked with a band back in the 80s, Christian band, although we were in the secular charts. I then became a filmmaker and a teacher, kind of parallel, really, I think.
Wow.
Similar sort of times, was working a bit in film and then got into filmmaking whilst I was teaching, taught media, film, dance, performing arts, drama, and IT, textiles and various things.
Wow.
And I felt, I think, like a jack of all trades. I think maybe people or audience could recognize this when you feel like you're not the expert in any one of those things, but you know a lot about different areas. And it wasn't until I realized I was directing. So I've also directed like live theatre, open air theatre with 100 plus volunteers. And that was an amazing experience. But I realized in that moment that that's what I love to do. And that's where all of the different aspects of what I'd done before was just coming and culminating together. But what God really revealed to me, and I realized what my call or my core, my why, as people call it, from the very beginning is, I know God called me to communicate his heart. So in whatever format that looks like, whether it is through film or dance or drama or music, whatever creative way that is. So I've also authored a book this year that was published this year. And people going, oh, now you've put author to your list. And it's like, well, I wasn't intending to do that. I was just looking to communicate God's heart. And that was the most practical way that I could do that in that moment, and that the Lord was leading me in. So that's kind of like who I am, I suppose, in a nutshell.
That is a fantastic little capsule of all the things that you've done. And it's amazing that you've just had such a privilege, kind of breadth of experience and depth of experience among so many different roles. And I can't wait to talk some more about that. But before we get into the details and the depths, which we love to do here at Faith in Media, is I like to start off with a bit of an icebreaker question, just to have a little bit of fun. Have you ever made a bucket list? And what are some of the things on it? Has anything been ticked off? And what is yet to be done?
That's a really good question. I remember watching a film years ago about the bucket list, and I thought about it, and I thought, do I have a bucket list? And I realized that I probably don't. There's things that I think you always think, oh, that would be amazing. And then when you do something, so when I was assistant producer on a film. It wasn't a Christian film, and I was invited to be the assistant producer on that. And we took the film over to Cannes Film Festival, to the Marché de Film, and being there in Cannes, and I thought, oh, wow, isn't this awesome? This is something I would want to put on my bucket list. Although I realized that as much as I enjoyed having had that experience, compared to really being in the presence of God, I don't think anything compares. It showed me how fake our world can be, and how false the media and that media film world. But it's one of those things people go, oh, wow, you went there and you got in behind the scenes at some of the things. And that felt like, actually, if I was really going to put it on a bucket list, if I knew what it was going to look like, that was like nothing in comparison to the experience I've had with God in sometimes little spaces.
Yeah.
Just, I was at Creation Fest recently, and having an opportunity to have this miraculous encounter with a woman who didn't know God at a B&B because she'd left her lights on. And she was talking to me about, she'd been reading through Revelation, didn't understand it, these 7 scrolls and this lamb who has to open this scroll. And I was there able to unpack the word of God to her, the Bible, and sort of explain what she was questioning and pray with her, and then just leave it with her. And who knows where her journey will take her. But to me, that was much more of an exciting moment than being some of the spaces that I've had the privilege to be in.
That's amazing.
No, I don't have one.
And that's totally fine. And I think what you said is such a crucial thing. I think obviously we're a faith-based media podcast, and that's a centrality. It's what draws us all together. It's the connecting glue between us all, and hearing our stories. That's always the one factor that's there. And there's nothing wrong, I think, at all with having a bucket list. Hence why we ask it for fun. And also, some of these are part of the aspirations, part of those even like God dreams of things to, places to travel, things to have achieved. But really what you've described is that sense of contentedness, that actually I got to do this in terms of sharing my faith, the basic thing in its simplicity, and how enriching that is. And really all of those things come down to that principle, isn't it? It's quite a basic thing, but it's such a central part of who we are as a community. Now, you've already mentioned that you've worked in so many different forms of media. It's quite different going from being, you mentioned that you were a dancer, you've been a producer on a film, you are a director of your own film, Lucy, the documentary, which was incredibly powerful and moving. And I would definitely love you to speak about that in a little while. Everything is, could you share with us, like, how did you get onto all of those? Did you know that you were going to get into those kind of areas particular to media, or was the stuff that that was kind of in your heart beforehand, it was just a matter of time when the opportunities came? Share us a little bit as to how you kind of got to those kind of very huge landmarks, if I may say.
Well, in fact, all of them have been my journey. And I think this is my story. This is my testimony, because there is a pattern that you recognize in each one of these areas. So you asked me, did I know? Well, I said no. I kind of shook my head. But then I thought, actually, my spirit did.
Wow.
Because there's a scripture, I'm trying to think which one it is. Psalm 32 verse 8 says that I will teach you and instruct you in the way you will go. I will guide you with my eye. And there's lots of interpretations or versions of the Bible in English that say, I will guide you with my eye upon you. And I knew God was speaking to me and showing me something about that. And I felt like a naughty child. It's like, well, I'm watching you, I've got my eye on you. And it just didn't feel right. And I prayed about it, and God said, no, I show you with my eye. I revealed to you. And I think I give an example in my book of how when, my children would play chess with my husband, and I'm not the best chess player, but, okay. We do like to play. And I would show them with my eyes, look, there, like to do, over there.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized that that's what God does. He kind of said, look, this is where I want to send you. And sometimes you get a sense of it. And I think, through scripture, when I read the Bible in the early days, and God said, I'm going to give you a platform, when he speaks to Jeremiah, he said, I'm going to put you as a voice to the nations. And I would never have told anybody that publicly, because at the time I was, living in a single parent family. I'd come from a lot of abuse and trauma, of bullying and all kinds of things. And I was friends wouldn't have realized, but on the inside, there was so much anxiety, and behind closed doors, my mum saw when I was really having a breakdown. I was just there rocking or sucking my thumb at 18. It feels shameful to say, but I was having that mental health moment where I just thought, what's the point in life? And God kind of stepped in and drew me out and demonstrated to me that because he'd seen me and he knew me, I recognized that I must have purpose, that my life had meaning, even though I didn't know what it would look like. So when he gave me this scripture in Jeremiah, I was like, I can't tell anyone that. I'm in this kind of obscure place in Southeast London where nobody really recognized me in that sense. But within 3 months, when I was saved, I was in my final year and then leaving dance college, and I'd laid it down. I'd kind of said, okay, Jesus, I just want to go around and tell everyone about you, because I got to the point and realized previously that dance had become more important than anything else in my life. It was my escapism. It was the place where I just thought, joy. This is freedom. And when I got saved, I realized that actually, Jesus, I gave my life to you because I was making a mess of it. So I need all of you, and I have to let go. When I read, don't have anything before me. And I realized I did, so I laid it down. And that's when he gave me that scripture and said, right, I'm going to give this back to you, but it's going to be for my glory, not for you. And within 3 months, I found myself on this stage, massive auditorium. I'd gone with a couple of dancers from a workshop who'd invited me to go and dance. They were going to do this YMCA celebration in Sweden. And the next thing, it was like this massive stadium, thousands of people, King and Queen of Sweden on the front row. And I was given a microphone. It was televised to the nation of Sweden. And I was given a microphone to sort of introduce what we were doing, why we were doing what we were doing. We were Christians. We were telling kind of Bible stories and themes through the dance. And I had this amazing opportunity to preach the gospel and before royalty and to the whole nation of Sweden. And in that moment, I knew that when God speaks, he performs his word. He watches over it to perform it. And I knew that was true. And whilst I was in this dance company, I just felt, they were very classically trained. I was contemporary trained, but because of all the trauma and stuff in my life, I wanted to really do a lot of performance that was hitting some of those raw issues. Particularly as a teenager, because I was such a mess. It was like I wanted to help people that felt the same. And so I ended up, again, I just went to a gig. This gig, I heard this band were about to release a song into the secular charts as a Christian band, Heartbeat.
What was the name of the band?
Heartbeat.
So
Sue Rinaldi, if anyone knows her, she was the lead singer, part of Ray and Nancy Gowdy, kind of initiate that as part of NGM. But yes, we had Tears from Heaven and the winner that was released into the secular charts. We got to number 32 in the charts, did a lot of TV stuff. But prior to that, I'd just gone to a gig. I just felt I needed to be there. I got a sense of, this is where you need to be. These people are doing what I'm calling you to do, but you're going to be using dance. I didn't know they were looking for a dancer. They were a band. Who would have thought that a band would be actively looking at that moment for a dancer? And I just happened, to just before we left, I just said, I just wanted thank the guy. And I saw he was free because they said, don't come up unless you want prayer. I said, look, I don't want prayer, but I just wanted to say thank you. And he said, no, come chat. And the next thing, they were asking me to come and audition. And we saw hundreds on hundreds of people, particularly young people, set free, filled with the Holy Spirit, just on their knees, crying to God. And that was more impactful from being on stage and doing the amazing stuff that we did, was the transformation in lives. So every moment, and the same with film, doors open, teaching. I was not qualified. I had some O levels. I did not have A levels. I had an E in theatre studies. And I only did that because when I went to college, dance college, you had to do an A level.
Yeah.
And I was too young, really. I was 16. You're supposed to have been 18 to start professional dance college. But they let me in and said, right, but you're going to have to do this A level in 1 year, which I did, and was, So again, I just got a call. Somebody, sort of, this school needed a teacher and they were desperate. My CV, I think I'd sent out my CV at some point, don't know why. And they kind of said, we're desperate. You applied back in April and it was now August. And we didn't look at you because you're not qualified. But they kind of said that. But they said, the students start next week. Can you come in? So I just said, well, if you make a mess of it, which they kind of expected me to, don't worry, we're going to get a new professional, an actual teacher in the next few months. And I ended up staying there a year, doing more subjects, and they said, you need to go and get trained. And doors opened up. And for film, I was whilst I was teaching at a sixth form college, and I was asked to teach media. I knew a bit about filmmaking, but I didn't know half the terminology and the theories. I learned on the job. But they gave me this opportunity and I just knew God had opened the doors. And he'd said, there's no better way to learn than to have to teach. And wow, did I learn so much on that job.
Absolutely.
And in that time, I'd sort of connected with a film producer locally, just invited him to come and speak to my students. And the next thing, he was inviting me to come and be the assistant producer on his film.
Wow.
But prior to that, I'd taken the students. It was in my first year of teaching media and film. I'd done 1 year as a drama teacher, but then 1 year as, when I started, I hadn't even qualified at that point. I qualified, it took me another 2 years to qualify part-time. But I created a residential film school for the students. And I thought, wouldn't that be great? I've done a lot of small film stuff and with my church and that kind of filmmaking. And wouldn't it be great to teach the students, with a real life, director. So I knew somebody was a director and invited him to come along. And it was like giving the students this experience I never dreamt would be an opportunity for me. And so the director there was a Christian, and he'd done last time BBC and things. And he said to me, he saw some of my work. He said, what are you doing working on your own? Because I'd just gone out to Sri Lanka. Backstory. I'd done a bit of, I hadn't done anything actually in my church at that point. No filming, no nothing. It started off, I just knew in my spirit. I went to see a film at the cinema, and God said, I want you working in film. Because why? I think it's important to go to the why, is because I'm a storyteller. A communicator, and I understand how the spiritual dimension impacts our physical, our reality, what we see. There's so much going on that impacts on what we're seeing. And I suddenly saw that in dance I wasn't able to demonstrate that, but in film you can show things that tell stories. And my heart just leapt at the possibilities. Things like Avard, things weren't even in anybody's perception in those years, all those years before. And I'd seen, even before we had Christian radio, I'd seen screens, and God showed me people on their faces crying, weeping, repenting, getting filled with the Spirit, just through seeing somebody on a screen. And something in my spirit leapt, but we didn't even have things like Premier Radio, UCB, CBN, God Channel. None of that existed. But I remember crying and out to God to see these things that I was seeing in my spirit. And so, I'd said to the Lord, you've got to make a way. And in fact, my son was at a club and my husband had taken him, and he said, oh, I got chatting to this guy and he does these film courses. So I went along to 2 weekend film courses. It was like a Friday night to Sunday thing. And that's where I met this director. And then I didn't know what to do with it, but we'd gone out via Sri Lanka on this family holiday thing that we had. That's another story. I have to stop myself if I keep
we will go to too many places.
When I was there, my kids came back and the tsunami hit that year.
Oh wow.
We'd gone in the September, it was for a wedding, and in the December the tsunami hit, and I felt like we've got to do something. My kids were asking, they were wanting to pray. They were only at like junior and infant school age. And it was like my husband turned around and said, Sarah, you've just gone on these 2 film video schools. I mean, they're only 2 weekend learning the basics. He said, you go make a film. And I ended up going out there and filming in Sri Lanka, and didn't know what to do with it. But that's when this director saw the work that I'd done and said, what are you doing on your own? And I said, well, I just know that I'm supposed to be in film, but I don't know how to. And he said, well, let's just pray. So we prayed. That was in the sort of September, October when I ran this residential. And in the January was when this non-Christian producer came and asked me to work on his film. You see, I didn't go knocking on the doors. I didn't go pushing doors or emailing, banging in everybody. But I was on my face saying, Lord, you've said this. You do what you've already shown me in the Spirit. You do what you've already spoken in my life. I just want to come into alignment with your purpose.
Yeah.
So often we're looking at, and I know when I talk sometimes about, what's your purpose? What should you do? But actually it's us coming in alignment with his purpose.
Yeah. And I think there's so much from what you've said, from just, it's been a beautiful opportunity just to listen to how your story has evolved over time. And without a doubt, I think anybody that comes across this conversation will be moved by that, particularly because the one common denominator between you having very diverse experiences has been the same. And that is an obedience to God. And I think one of the verses that just really sprung up to me at that point in time, especially when he said that the first place that he put you when you said yes to the call was in front of kings and queens. And that's actually a proverb. He will bring you before kings and not unknown men. And if we really, should I say, surrender ourselves to this call that God places inside of us, if he's asking us into the creative space or within the media space, the more that we lean into him and his call about it, who knows what he is capable of doing with us in the simple obedience. And I love that you keep saying that, like, it wasn't me knocking on doors. And I think we definitely have our parts to play. And it sounded like you still had to do your work. You still had to do the work. You still had to turn up and collaborate with certain people and find your way in terms of actually producing what God is asking you to do. But it wasn't in terms of, I'm going to strive in my own strength. I'm trusting God. Where is the next place you want me to tread? Where is it the place that you want me to toil in the soil, so to speak, which is so encouraging to hear. Now, you have such a powerful testimony, Sarah, and you've been able to use just kind of what God has placed inside of you, that vision, and you've made it reality. It's birthed outwards. We see the evidence of it. It's become tangible, real things. For those that don't know, Sarah's book, Discern the Times, is recently published this year. How is your testimony? You mentioned that you were not in a good place when God stepped in. Great plug. We will definitely have those details at the bottom of the caption as well, which is wonderful. In which ways has it influenced or translated into, it's clear the depth of the passion that you have on all of these platforms? Did you find that experience, your story, coming through the work that you were doing, even if it was about stories for other people or stories about things that were not related to you directly? Did you find there was kind of an interconnection between that as you progressed on your journey?
Definitely. I mean, I didn't see it at the time. It's a bit like when I stopped to write this book, and it was because I stopped because I was feeling a little bit like I need a holiday. I haven't had a holiday since way before lockdown. And prior to that, my husband had open heart surgery. And I've been working really, really hard on, Lucy Breaking the Silence when I directed that and then edited it. And so after that, I'd just done a lot of stuff, teaching and editing and working. And it was like I realized that I needed a bit of a rest and I needed a bit of time out. And I needed to, I believe this will help people listening, is I needed to clear my head from the clutter, from the noise.
Yeah.
I realized that I was thinking, I know, Lord, there's certain things you're showing me, but the temptation is to there's so much resource online to try and make it happen. Now, something you said just now about being faithful in doing, the waiting is active. It's not a sit and do nothing. And so before I was, when I'd done that little film in Sri Lanka, I was then invited to my church. They had a media team and I'd been invited before, but they invited me to join and to help. I spent years, months and months and months, cable bashing, holding the cable, learning through watching. Making the teas and coffees. And I was not a young woman. I had 3 children at home at that time.
Wow.
And so I do want to re-emphasize what you said there, that be faithful in learning the skills, in being, volunteering to help, because just being around others that are ahead of you.
Yeah.
Even when you feel like, a lot of these guys were a lot younger than me. And, that was a challenge because I had to serve. And I think it's important that we remember we don't ever stop serving.
I think, that's so powerful. And I love also, I want to just kind of shine a bit of like what you said there. And I think we underestimate that sometimes, no matter who picks this up, we have a mentoring program here at Christians in Media for young people, but that does not restrict when God is able to use you. And I love that you mentioned, if God is calling you to do something, we have to have a posture of humility to submit ourselves to the being faithful bit of where has he placed us to learn. Go and build somebody else's dream and serve theirs before he necessarily maybe is going to give you, the freedom to do your own. But that's where we're learning. And even if you feel like, if other people are younger than me or further ahead than me, where is my place in this? We cannot look at that. There is purpose behind all of that. And we are really governed by God's kind of time scale and not our own, even though I know specifically in media that I can feel sometimes that there are time limits of opportunity. But from what you've just said, you shattered that kind of glass ceiling already. So yeah, what was that like? How did that feel? Because that's not, I think, an easy thing that maybe people don't always talk about as well very often. You mentioned this is not the season of life that you thought you'd be learning these very basic skills, holding cables. What did that feel like for you?
It was very humbling in many ways.
Yeah.
And it was that, and I think it's, you know, you asked the question about the book, you know, where did that come from? But one of the thing was, you know, having done all that I've done, I really wanted to, you know, help, you know, bring all the creatives together. I have a vision to see, you know, dancers, filmmakers, musicians, singers, artists, you know, actors all coming together. I have great vision for that. But God said, they're not ready.
Wow.
They're not ready. And I realized that I have gone through a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, even since being a Christian, even since those times when I've been doing these amazing things in public. I've also gone through some real challenges. And so I was going through other challenges, not just the serving part, but it was like, if God is who he says he is, if he is the Lord who I know him to be from when I was younger and saw him open those miraculous doors, see him move and bring healings that just I could not explain. And your brain afterwards can kind of water it down. Well, maybe this, maybe that.
Yeah.
I had to say, either this word is true. God is almighty, all seeing, all knowing, or I'm bigger than him.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment, it's like, well, your word says to serve. And so it was like embracing the pain. I've had to do that many, many times in my life. Embrace the pain in a way of saying, I'm going to choose, no matter what I feel, to declare life and truth in my life, in my home, in my family, in my circumstances. You don't always have the energy to do those things, but in the time when you don't have the energy, you are doing it in your spirit. You're aligning with the truth of what the word says, despite the opposite appearing to be true. And so when you choose to forgive and say through gritted teeth, sometimes I forgive that person. You know, I remember marching up and down my living room or my bedroom one day, just somebody had really said some stuff that was really painful. And I've had to do it many times since. But I remember the first time I did it, I just probably spent about an hour saying, I just forgive that woman. I forgive her in the name of Jesus. God, it's hurt so bad, but I'm going to say I forgive her because you love her, because you, and, you know, you created her.
She's real life, right? Yeah.
And it wasn't that God needed that hour of my time. I needed it until something shifted in me. I kept speaking it out until something shifted, a bit like the Psalms when I think David was like, woe is me. And then he'd kind of work through it and then go, but God, you are so much greater. How can I, little ant, compare wisdom, my foolishness with yours?
I think it's just so important to hear that, and thank you so much for sharing that. That's the real daily reality of what it means to occupy this space. If God has called us to whatever endeavor in the creativity world, or whatever it is that he's called you to do with the purpose that's driven behind it, it means you're going to encounter adversity. It's going to be challenges. You are going to be the person actually changing through all of that. And that leads so beautifully, I think, into my next question, because I think that's kind of an area that I don't always think gets enough, you know, day in the spotlight. Is we talk about being creative and we produce our creativity and people see the evidence of it on a stage piece or in a film or in a song that we've written or in our performances. But the whole idea of the creative process is so multidimensional. And one of the things that we don't always tend to look at is actually how we are impacted in the process of birthing it through. And my question to you in all of that is, in which way have you found your work to have changed or developed you personally? And you've had so many amazing opportunities. Can you look at yourself and say, I remember actually this really shifted a perspective of me. I learned this about myself during this project or this endeavor. Has there ever been kind of scenarios like that for you?
Yes, I think numerous. I'm trying to think of one, for example. I'm not sure if I can pick out one, but I think the whole journey, everything you're doing in many ways. So one obviously is pride. That's an obvious one where you realize, you know, you want to, I remember being on tour and hearing about how Cliff Richard, you know, would treat even the roadies and the people just serving with as much respect and dignity as other people. But I remember when I was first in that situation and being on stage, and I remember looking back and think there were moments when I felt like, oh, I'm up there, you know, down here in the, you know, like, who are you kind of thing.
Yeah.
And you know, I was very young and very naive, and I think being aware that whoever in whatever area of creativity or wherever you're positioned, don't judge. When I was even in Cannes, I remember, and these are not Christians, that a lot of the people that had the most money, the most influence, the most kind of credits to their name in a worldly sense, didn't dress accordingly. You wouldn't know who they were. In fact, they were the opposite. And they were the ones that were just in their jeans and sandals, these guys, and t-shirts, scruffy t-shirts. But often how the world would see as someone who they just knew who they were. They didn't need to prove anything. And I think, you know, that was one of the important lessons I learned, is that God doesn't judge in the way that the world judges. And the same with skills. I realized that there was so much on a practical level as well with skills that I didn't know until I was in an environment and somebody who knew something that I didn't even know you needed to know. So well, it's a bit like editing. Oh, I can just edit a video. You know, there's so much free software, and there's an element of truth in that. But there's so much more that people don't know. They don't know the power of how to tell that story, or why. Why do you use a close-up as opposed to a long shot or a mid shot or wide or canted or whatever else? You know, why do you use those specific angles or that lighting? Because it's the power of how you communicate that story. They're things that people don't know. They just think you get the footage, you can film something that looks good, edit it so it looks good, and not understand how that is communicating to an audience. And I realized in probably every area of creativity that there's so much more that we don't know in that moment, and then we discover it.
And I think if you can accept that, that's definitely half the journey there, in terms of, if I can do that, it helps that like you said, let's keep that posture, that heart posture in check. Because if we have a constant kind of approach of humility, like, and I'm aware that I'm only going to know what I know right now, and that what I know is never all there is to know, it means it puts us in a place that we'll always be learning, we'll always be open to when things don't always go to plan. And you mentioned that even when you started as a Christian and you had some incredible, you know, like landmark moments of, you know, seeming, I would say the word success, they are successful achievements, even if it's God that created the platform for you and opened doors that no one else seemed to be able to do for you out of nothing, is to consider that actually there were some challenges along the way as well. It wasn't just one amazing mountaintop moment to another. I wondered if you could kind of share a little bit about that. Like, have there been big challenges along the way as well as these wonderful, great, you know, accomplishments for you? And what has that been like navigating?
Interesting navigating, but I think just this represents, it's a little pearl. It kind of represents 30 years of marriage. That's a long time, so it kind of tells you my age. But and I was not a teen bride or anything like that. But what it actually represents is grit. It represents a bit of dirt, an aggravation, something that shouldn't be there. You know, when that oyster receives that irritation, that pearl, that annoyance, you know, it does something to fight it, to push it away. And I've gone through some extreme stuff. So, you know, I mentioned that I'd gone through abuse and trauma and stuff when I was young. But I've also gone through intense challenges that I didn't plan. I don't kind of share everything publicly, purely because it's not just about me.
Of course.
So, you know, there's other people that are involved. And that journey for me has been, decades. It wasn't just 5 years, 2 years, 1 year. I'm going to pray and God's going to just transform the situation or the circumstances or the people or person involved. That has been a journey. And through that journey, God covers it with his grace. He just covers it with that beautiful substance in his mercy of his grace, which gives you the ability to choose to do the right thing. And I think for me, I was, kicking and screaming. And I mean, I spent years where I even, many, many nights cried myself to sleep in situation, thinking, how can I navigate this? How can I move forward? I mean, one situation I was in was even which I can share, was when I moved into my home where we live now, been here, many years. But when we first moved in, it had live woodworm throughout. We were just about to extend the downstairs bathroom, remove that, put that upstairs, extend the kitchen. And the whole house was riddled with live woodworm. I had 3 children, all at school, quite young. My youngest at the time was about 2. And they were, the room was chaos. The house was chaos. So I was sleeping on the floor with my daughter. Everything was in boxes. We hadn't unpacked. I had no kitchen for 5 months, no bathroom for 3 months.
Goodness.
No hot water for a week. I remember taking my children round to, someone's house saying, please can I have a shower? Or the local sports center,
yes,
try and get a cup of tea in the morning. And nobody knew, and my husband didn't cope with the stress of that. And we ended up parting for 6 months. So I found myself on my own for that 6-month period. And, he had no income because, he'd lost his job. I was not a teacher at that time. So I was a dancer and then mother with 3 young children. And nobody knew what it was like. I was camping in my own home, but it was after I'd just come back from Sri Lanka and seen after the tsunami how everybody had lost not just family, but their businesses, their clothes off their back, everything. And yeah, I could say not just family. Family was the key, that they'd lost loved ones. And here I was with a house, with a roof over my head. I didn't know how I was going to put food on the table every day. And every moment was a miracle. Every provision was a miracle, day to day. And I couldn't see. It was weeks, months. It ended up being about 5 years, 3 years before it looked anything like a home. 5 years before I really kind of felt like we'd moved in and made it a home and got our kitchen and bathroom sorted, and our children had their bedrooms. But it was chaos. And it was an incredibly challenging time for each one of us, but in different ways. My husband was going from, he expected just come in, provide for a family, and suddenly the rug was taken from under his feet too. And I didn't at that time see his perspective, but on reflection, we can say, actually, he felt like a failure as a husband. Wow. Because here we were in a situation that we didn't plan, and the whole of our downstairs floor had to be taken up and replaced. Wow. So we just had, stairs hanging, really wasn't a place to bring up children. And I was just like, what we do, because we didn't have more money to fix it. And the insurance, we were in a legal battle with the insurance company for 5 years and ended up really not getting anything. But that's another story. But
so important to hear, because this ties in so well, I think, with what we started with, particularly on this point, is people have huge aspirations, and even like, it didn't stop that God had a calling on your life. It didn't stop that his grace wasn't there. And like you mentioned, the whole grit analogy, which I think is a beautiful, beautiful symbol to be wearing. I'm a big fan of pearls myself, so it was already a winner for me. But that's a true element. And I don't think we consider that about what potentially may lie ahead. It doesn't stop God's goodness. It doesn't stop that the call was still there, and that the achievements and the glory that he was going to bestow on you as a vessel who's going to help him bring these things to pass. How do you hold on to that when things are really tough? I know exactly what you meant. Living in a building site is no joke, with small children who are completely dependent on you. And like you've just mentioned, all the other elements that were going on all at the same time. How did you hold on?
And I think, again, it's like I said to my children, when my husband left for that 6-month period, we didn't know at one point, you know, he was talking about divorce and things like that.
Wow.
But I said to my children, I said, God put us together. You know, God is the one who's in control of our lives, and he loves you. He loves daddy. He loves us, and he's going to bring him back. But we're camping. You know, our church used to run a camp every year, faith camp. And I said, you know, we're just camping in our own home. And they'd been to Sri Lanka. They'd seen before the tsunami, and then they'd seen on the television, and they saw the footage that I brought back. I actually went and showed the raw footage to their school. And the children responded and sent pictures and all sorts of things back out, colouring crayons and things, and saw how even the tiniest thing could impact somebody else's life.
Huge. Yeah.
And it was like that brought hope to my children. That's what I was aiming to do. Now they've gone through their own journey because of the challenges we've walked through. They've had to work it out for themselves. And the cry of a mother is, you want to say, just, you know, I was saying to someone yesterday, you know, like Joseph, when he went through his journey, you know, if you were Joseph's mum, you go, in the name of Jesus, I'm going to break that curse off, that slavery mentality, bring him out, you know, bring him from the prison. You would be going at it in the spirit. And God just said, you know, there is a bigger picture. Such a bigger picture than what you can see right now. And he often through my journey gave me the kind of parallel of Joseph, that you couldn't see what the end result would be. He couldn't see when he was in prison, when his brothers rejected him, when he was rejected and betrayed by Potiphar's wife. He couldn't see the bigger picture. That God was training him and was planning for something much bigger. And it wasn't even about Joseph anyway. It was totally not about him. It was about God's people, the children of Israel. He wanted to make sure that they didn't go through the famine and die. So he said, well, I need to get somebody in position. So let's just get this person who's just an empty vessel, and let's just put something in them. Let's take them through a lot of challenges because I want to use them. But it's not about you. It's not about, you know, and I think we often forget that everyone in the Bible, we see the heroes and the miracles. And I think during that time, I just had to get back into the word. But God would use things such as Lord of the Rings. Oh my, Lord of the Rings. I just
epic series of films, though. Epic.
I mean, there I was watching it, and Frodo going, why has this ring come to me? I don't want it. You know, I wish I could go back. Can't somebody? And Gandalf comes over and said, it's not for you to decide. It's not for you to decide, but you can choose how you embrace what God has given to you, the life you live. We can't change our lives. When I look at people like I did in Sri Lanka, and you see people living in extreme poverty or health challenges and heartaches and losses and bereavements and extreme stuff, you think, you know, how can I not be thankful that, you know, for the little that I have, or for the much that I have, because we have so much.
Yes, we have.
And the one thing that God showed me was like this life. In fact, I remember a producer came up to me and he said, you know, Sarah, he didn't know the half of what I'd gone through. He really didn't. But he said, you know, I think it was a point my husband just, you know, was let loose from his job at that time. And he said, Sarah, you just seem to have one thing after another. You know, what is going on? You believe in God. You're a Christian. Why is it kind of like, none of my friends, they're not Christians. They don't have it as tough as you. They don't seem to go through all these traumas and stuff. And I remember God just gave me the words. And I said to him, you're right. You know, we live in a world that's messy. We live in, you know, this earth that is full of sin, and most of the trauma and the stuff that we experience is as a result of either our own sin and unhealthy decisions, or others. And even the effects on our planet.
Sure, nature, absolutely.
As a result of our choices, you know. And so, but this life in comparison to eternity, where God says, you know, I promise to be with you in the mess, but I'm going to be with you forever, and you can be with me in the goodness of forever. It's like I said to him, in your very own words, a phrase that he would commonly use. It's like, it is a blip this life in comparison to eternity. And if you're going to choose which one, it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. So for me, the no-brainer is, am I going to choose in the pain to praise when I don't want to? Or am I going to succumb? Now, we all have moments of self-pity. I mean, I've had plenty, ourselves and being in that place. But I think in those times, I have to be really conscious of saying, I'm going to zip the lip because, I'm feeling low and I realize now is not a good time. So I need to get into that place of stillness so that then I can say, even in my spirit, even if you have no words, you can praise in your spirit to say, I'm just trusting that you are bigger and you will turn this round for your glory. And even if I don't see it, like Habakkuk said in the last chapter of Habakkuk, he said, even if I don't see what you've promised,
well, I bless the Lord. Yeah, absolutely.
Because we've got eternity to reap the benefit.
I think that is such an important perspective to consider for every person in terms of, does this matter now? What it feels like I'm holding on to for the call and for the glory of what God has asked me to do, and the challenges that in a broken and messy world is going to come. It doesn't nullify the truth of that word or what God has said. But like you said, have the perspective of like, this is for but a time, but eternity ahead is my reward. And I'm going to make sure that I've done everything I can and exhausted all of what he's placed inside of me to ensure that what he used me for or had planned to use me for was accomplished in this whatever hair's breadth of a life that we are gifted with. And we're kind of drawing to a bit of a close now, but I wanted to ask you this question, and we've spoken extensively about this beautiful range of platforms you've been able to occupy and hats you've been able to wear to do what God's asked you to do as a storyteller. Did you ever feel that your work as a storyteller is being called for a specific audience? And if so, who is it and why that audience?
So I've often questioned in many ways, because when I know that when I wrote the book, it was like God just said, this is a message for the church, or for Christians, for
right.
in this time. And so I was thinking, everybody, because I've always had a heart for young people, particularly that kind of, probably your age, millennials and Gen Zs, with lots of zeal and passion and coming in to be able to use your gifts and the creativity that God gives you. And I have a real passion for that demographic.
Yeah.
But I realized that my heart and that I have very much is for those that perhaps feel overlooked, that like me felt like I was going through rubbish. I was like that one in 1 Corinthians 1 Corinthians 1 verses 25 to 29. It says, I choose the foolish things of this world, those who is as of nothing, to shame the wise. And I remember going up to somebody quite prominent at the time in media and Christian media. And I said to him, he came and spoke at our church. And I said, wow, God has really put in my heart to use film and to get into Christian media. And he kind of like, oh, okay, what have you done? And he kind of really snubbed me. And I felt like, I could have read it wrong. Let me say, I don't want to diss anybody, but I could have read it wrong, but that's how it felt like. Yeah. And I'm sure I've done the same to others. I'm sure that people felt the same. And it's like, because sometimes people don't recognize your gifts and skills, and you can't expect everyone to know what's hidden, that treasure that is sometimes hidden, because people will see the grit or the dirt. And so you have to just be faithful to allow God to do the work, because God sees it. And I think I do have a real passion for people that know they're called, that they just want to give all that they have to serve the Lord. They may not know how, and they may not know what that looks like, and they may have a lot of training to do. But if you've got some kind of creative skill, talent, gift, even if it is in its incubation stage, but know that you want to serve the Lord in whatever capacity, whether it seems to be in a secular space like the film that I directed, or the Christian space with the band and other things that I've done. I think that's really how I describe the people that feel called to encourage.
That sounds incredible, and it's so lovely to hear that, like, you see You see the hearts that you're speaking to. You see who you're building for. You see who you're writing for. You see who you're constructing, this platform for, a visual demonstration of expression. You see the people that it's for, and the purpose behind it is so moving. And I want to leave this with this last question, Sarah. This has been an incredible conversation. I have had to hold back my own emotions listening to some of the things that you've shared. And I know that others will be just as touched and inspired, if not just about the fact that God can do anything. You've shown us that he didn't just give it to you, he's shown you that he can bring it to pass, but also how he's just been so lovingly sustaining you and in strength. It doesn't sound like, when I listen to your testimony, that you've come to the other side of the fire with any smelling of smoke. You sound strong and you sound thriving, and not someone that is broken by life and its processes, which all of us engage with at some stage or in some season. What would be your advice for those starting to look out or into kind of the branches of forms of the creative expression in media? What would be your advice to those up and coming, and they've got big aspirations to get into the same kind of lines of work that you have done before? What would you advise to them?
So I think a couple of things. First of all, is to make sure that you take time to lean into God. And what I mean by that is, I used to think, it just means you spend hours praying and hours reading the word. And that's not what I'm saying. It's a heart position. So even just going for walks and giving yourself brain space, especially in this kind of very connected social media technological world, it's so tempting to look at every fad and what everybody else is doing, because in that space you can allow God to speak to you. If your heart is just positioned before God, even if you're just walking in silence and enjoying nature, he can speak to you, and you will start to see things that you have a passion for and a heart for. So a lot of the creativity that I've done, I saw it when I was just worshiping God. I'd just be worshiping God, and then I'd kind of get ideas, and I'd realize I'm thinking around creative ideas, and I think, that's really bad. I should be praising God. But I realize now that it was because I was in worship and praise, God was giving me the download, and he was showing me, and then he would show me spaces to, connect with people. Go connect, find out if you can see somebody has got what you want, connect with them, and don't push it in a sense of feeling like, this is going to be suddenly a miraculous answer to prayer. It's just looking at, how can I skill up? I think you mentioned earlier the opportunity at Christians in Media as a mentorship, and I also coach. So I coach that are looking. Mine is paid programs, so it may not be for everybody, but there are opportunities out there. There are other people who will give opportunities, and it's knowing you need to be able to invest, whether that is money or whether it is just time, or, your energy. Be willing to invest. So take that time, be positioned in your heart. That surrender, deeper the surrender, the deeper the more easily he can shift you to the space that he wants you to be, and being open to invest, and trying to not feel like you've got to grapple, because I think that's the most challenging, I think, in this day and age, for people not to do that, because they think, I'm going to miss it, fear of missing out, and so forth.
And that's not really something that should ever be driving any of our steps. We need to be walking according to the faith of what God's placed inside of us, what he's asked us to do, and according to his word. And everyone will be in their lane. Everyone will get to their destination if they use that as kind of like, this is how we approach. This is our pitch mark. This is our gauge. This is our standard. Thank you, Sarah, so much for being with us today. This has been an incredible conversation. I know I've said that already, but honestly, I feel like I lack the depth of vocabulary to really kind of express how I think this is going to be beyond inspirational to people coming along this conversation, whether they're in media or not. And I think just a reminder of what we should be prioritizing on this journey, whether it's media or not, how we should be positioning our heart, where we should find our place in a world that is ever changing and rapidly evolving, I think quicker than it's ever done in previous eras and generations before us. But just to find a place to be still, prioritize a stillness with God, to hear his voice clearly, and we will be good with him. No matter what it looks like, we'll be good if we stick close to him. Sarah, it's been such an honor. Thank you so much for your time. God bless you. And before we go, anything that you would like to share with us in terms of what it is that we can be looking out for in terms of your work, and how do we follow that, please?
So I have some possible things, you know, when you're carrying things in your heart.
Yeah.
So just keep connected in. And, you know, if you want to contact me, you can email me at sarah@provisioncreatives.com. Go to provisioncreatives.com is my website. You can connect with me on social media. But you know, my Instagram is not huge, but you can still connect with me there. Watch out and just see how things progress. But if you really do feel moved and feel like I'd like to connect with you, there's something that I'm perhaps struggling with, I'd really like to know a little bit more, then I'm very happy to hop on a call with somebody.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. God bless you. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. Take care.
Thank you so much, Carla.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages, and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.